Howdy, partners. Welcome to Curiosity Theory. It is your co host, Dr. Dakotah Tyler, astrophysicist, science communicator, author, former football player, and current washed up athlete.
What's up, y'all? Justin Shaifer here, also known as Mr. Fascinate, science communicator, STEM educator, entrepreneur, and man with golden voice. And I'm here to introduce an incredible young brother. This guy is doing some amazing work in the immunology space. We're going to be talking about health outcomes, the medical profession, doing some myth busting in the medical profession, and really having a comprehensive conversation around the state of health and medicine today. I can't wait to dive in with you, Nick. Tell everybody about yourself, man.
I love the golden voice and the washed up athlete. Y'all still look like you got it to me. My name is Nick, or known as Nick the Immunologist online, Nicholas Jackson. I am a PhD candidate, hopefully graduating very soon from St. Louis University. And I am just a lover of science, fun facts, a little nerdy, anime watcher. I like sports too. I used to want to be the cool kid, but also want to be nerdy. It didn't work, whatever. You grow up and you figure out that none of that mattered. And here I am today just posting, talking online, and shouting out immunology as much as I can.
Well, Nick, we can't wait to nerd out with you in the coolest possible way. Let's dive in.
Right now.
Nick, you from the south side of Chicago. You said the south suburbs. I appreciate the distinction.
Yeah, you have to clarify because people, they'll get on you if they really from the south side. And and you tell them you from the south side, they say what part? And you say, oh, the suburb, that's over with. So for people not from Chicago, I always say Chicago because it's like a 45-minute drive to the city for me. But people in Chicago they're gonna hate on me for that. So I try to be careful.
Well, I certainly appreciate the distinction there, man. And where are you based right now?
I'm in St. Louis right now, St. Louis, Missouri.
Right. Okay, yeah, and St. Louis isn't far from where we're at, actually. Like, not
Is it?
not
We're in Tulsa.
Yeah, we're in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It's not like super far.
Yeah, I mean, I've never been to Oklahoma, but I would assume it's like 6-7 hours distance.
Yeah, driving. Yeah, something like that.
That's pretty far. You think that's not far?
I
7
think
hours?
relatively speaking, it's not that far. Yeah, it's all relative.
Relative to what? The moon?
No, relative to like other parts of the United States, like the east and west coast, or the northernmost part of the U.S. and the southernmost. I mean,
Yeah.
It definitely can't be
Wait.
more than a 2-hour flight. So,
yeah, which is, I'd say, relatively close.
So is that going to sound?
We're not going to hear that in the final cut.
Oh, okay.
So just ignore it for now.
Okay. All right. Yeah, man. So I guess if you want to compare to something that's much further away, like, yeah, I guess you're right. Like, it's closer than Pluto, but I just wouldn't say that that's close. Like a 6-7 hour drive, I wouldn't be like, oh yeah, that's close.
I don't know, man. I don't know.
But
hey, what do I know?
Yeah, you can drive there in 1 day without stopping. So that's if you want to put a metric to a 1 day drive without stopping.
It's a 1 day drive. It's a less than 1 day drive away
without stopping.
Yeah. You could do that.
That's crazy.
I could do that. I don't know. Maybe not.
That's crazy. Didn't you drive out here?
I did. I drove
Cali.
Yeah, bro. So Nick, when we were building this place, I drove like a U-Haul full of studio equipment from LA to Tulsa, but it wasn't in 1 day. It was definitely
that's not a 1 day drive.
Yeah, nah.
That's
got it together, man.
12, what was that? 20 hours? 18 hours? What was that?
Dang, I think it was total. I think it was about 22.
Whew.
I first had an idea to stop and see the Grand Canyon, but I was like, nah, this is like, I got a U-Haul. Like, it doesn't even make sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you ever been to the Grand Canyon?
Nah, I wanted to see it for the first time, but
I haven't ever seen it either.
Yeah,
I feel like I know what it looks like though.
Yeah, I think I know what it looks like.
Yeah. You ever been to the Grand Canyon?
I went as a kid, and it's scary when you're little because it's massive. So
yeah, well, wait till you find out, bro. It's still big.
Yeah.
It's one of those. Bro, I hear.
You want to experience it and see it visually for yourself. I guarantee it's an experience.
Yeah. What are the other wonders of the world? It's like, is the Grand Canyon one of them? Seriously?
I think Machu Picchu.
Machu Picchu isn't Stonehenge? Isn't that one
I
of them?
think
I don't
Stonehenge.
know.
The pyramids of
The
Giza?
I believe that one.
Gotta be.
The pyramids. Yeah.
there's one in it's like a cave with like structures built into a wall. I forget what the
Oh,
name of that one.
Petra.
Yeah, that one. Yeah, yep.
Petra.
Petra.
Yeah.
That's another one.
Which means rock in Arabic.
Hmm.
And it's a city carved into the rock. It seems unlikely, however, that they would call the city rock, though.
You don't think they said
Other
that?
than
That's
rock.
like having a city called brick and mortar or like concrete. It doesn't.
Concrete City.
It only makes sense when you say it in a different language.
Hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I always wonder, like, what other things are lost in translation? You know, I feel like that happens a lot from language to language.
Mhm.
Like, there's just nuance that we miss, and when like phrases or terms are translated. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel you, bro.
Very true.
That's
Very true.
yeah, definitely. Speaking of translation, um Nick, I as an immunologist, I hear that our immune system translates there's a process of translation in the immune system.
That was
Yep.
quite the reach, I will
Uh,
say. But
you
Doesn't
definitely
something get transcribed or
you,
translated or
you
something like
definitely
that?
brought you went somewhere with it.
went somewhere with it, got lost, never came back. But Nick, I
Yeah.
think you
So
got it from here,
there's
man.
I wouldn't even call it like an immunological process. They happen in immune cells,
Mm,
but it's very basic
period. So,
biology.
mm. Oh, excuse
You
me.
got
Yeah, it's like RNA and DNA
yeah,
translation, right?
exactly. So you got
Yeah.
transcription, which is the turning of DNA to RNA, and then translation RNA to protein, and then the
Mm.
central dogma of science is DNA to RNA to protein, and that's how everything that we ever need is made within our bodies.
And I'm actually a little bit curious. Do we know the sequence of events that led to like once the DNA was a thing and RNA was a thing? Like I know we don't know abiogenesis, how life started from nothing or from non-life rather than nothing, but do we know once like that first strand of DNA or whatever existed, how it starts like building proteins? Is that like well understood yet?
I think it's pretty well understood the process of DNA, RNA to protein. And then if you're
Mm,
going all the way back to I said beginning first strand of DNA that you could think of, which I can't even tell you what that would probably be, but a lot of people would probably attribute that to some form of bacteria,
yeah.
something like that. Um, Ultimately, from what I believe and I understand in science, is that all things that we have today generated from random mutations that occur in DNA over time, repeatedly, multiple times, in a very freakishly way to say it, which some people may not like saying that, is that arguably it's just like getting cancer multiple times until something new develops.
Hmm.
Because it's just a bunch of damage and repair mechanisms that make mistakes, grow cell types that aren't supposed to be there, and then
Mhm.
grow into something that never existed before. And eventually you get more different organisms, and maybe they veer off into other species that can do things in the water versus in the air and blah, 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 all that stuff because it just small differences in DNA end up accumulating over time until you eventually get something drastically different. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's my take.
It's a beautiful and fascinating process, man. And I think that so my understanding of like this process of our cells kind of developing proteins through our DNA, it's almost like our our cells read the DNA and then they kind of 3D print these proteins, right, that are used to synthesize different things. And that
Mhm,
can be like an energetically expensive process, right? When we have like an immune response to something, whether that be
mhm,
like an allergic reaction or something like that, where we might feel like some soreness and stiffness in the back of our neck. My
mhm,
understanding is it's from this process of basically your cells 3D printing these proteins. Um, yeah,
mhm.
is that a correct way to kind of think about the process?
Yeah, that's a good way to think. And I'm an analogy guy. I love putting together a good analogy. We could put one together right now. In that I like if you think of the process when your proteins develop and turn into these things that can accumulate and affect your body, whatever it could be, it goes through ribosomes in your cells, and these ribosomes are in two separate subunits. They look like potatoes to me if you look at a book, like a big old potato, and then the bottom half of a potato that was cut off come together, and then your RNA gets read in between those. And I think of it as a vending machine. So you put $1 in, your dollar's that RNA getting read. It reads, makes sure, hey, is that a one? Is that a five? Is that a 10? Is that a 20? Okay, you paid the right amount, and then on the back end, we're gonna give you what you bought with this dollar or $2 or $5 or whatever that you put in, and that what comes out is gonna be your protein. Not all
Mm.
the time you're gonna get what you want. You go to vending machine, you press E3, the three don't work, then it's supposed to be E34. You hit four, and then you accidentally hit five, and then something else comes out the vending machine, and now you got Cheez-Its when you wanted Doritos, and then now eventually all the mutations keep accumulating, and now you got things you don't want to eat anymore.
So that's kind of the way that a mutation works, is that it's just a failure to 3D print the correct protein.
Exactly. And it could be because it misread the dollar amount. And so now you couldn't actually afford what you wanted.
Mm.
Or what comes out on the back end is the wrong thing that you needed. Usually there's several different forms of mutations that can occur in your DNA. It's either a missense, a deletion, a replacement of a certain nucleotide. So either you cut something out, you accidentally move something over, or you added in something that causes it to read differently. And this could all cause issues downstream with just like one small change. And mind you, when I say nucleotide, for people that don't know what that is, it's just the small letters that make up DNA, the A, T, C's, and G's. And instead of and in RNA, it's a U that's also in there. So
Mhm.
those letters, which are sugars on there and structures that come together, and everybody knows the whole story: DNA, double-stranded helix, yada yada. The fun Watson and Crick stuff that they discovered years ago. Actually, Rosalind Franklin. I should give shout out to the woman who was involved in that as well.
Hmm.
That was the development or understanding how DNA works, the structure of DNA. And then when you learn that, you can realize small changes in that could change the trajectory of anything you could think of in the world. So
Right, because there's so many possibilities for proteins that can be created, right?
yeah,
Weren't you telling me something about, Dakotah, this idea of there being more possible configurations of protein arrangements than there are stars in the universe, or it was something else? Atoms in
Oh,
the
no,
universe?
yeah, it's atom limited. So, if you think about the number, so we get into a lot of discussions, Nick, about potential other life forms. Sometimes we get very sci-fi, and it's interesting to think about how life that had maybe a different base of nucleotides, because there are more nucleotides than the five that you mentioned, right? We use
mhm,
four, RNA uses one, and then there are also like a dozen other nucleotides or something that exist that we just don't use. And we find them on comets, we find them on asteroids. And
wow,
so if you think about all of the different types of small molecules that you could make, the number exceeds the number of atoms in the universe,
That's crazy.
right? Like, so, if we could line them up one by one and try to knock them out, we would actually run out of material before you could hit every different possible combination of a small molecule, which is insane to think about.
Yeah, that almost feels like a scientific way of describing that anything is possible. Like, we can make anything.
Yeah, like almost more things are possible than are possible, kind
yeah,
of.
yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
That's crazy to me because you got to think of how many atoms are in one object in
Right.
itself, and you're saying
Mhm.
the combination of things you can create is more than I trillions and trillions and quadrillions and whatever other number figure things you could put trillions of atoms in something, and we
Yeah,
can make
like,
combinations in that.
yeah, I think the crazy thing, because there's like on the order of trillions of cells that make up our human body, like human cells. And so that, like, just for the audience to conceptualize how big of a number that has to be. In
Yeah.
one individual body, there are trillions of cells which are made up of, I don't know how many atoms in
Right.
each individual cell. So
Right.
that number is absolutely an incredibly large number that's hard to
Yeah.
fathom.
Impossible to fathom. And then, you think if everything that we know about life is basically a downstream product of these specific few nucleotides that are just like swapped, really, right? You're just like switching the order of them. It's not super complicated. What other potential things could you make if you like swapped out all of the nucleotides with something else? Or instead of having pairs, you had like triplets, you had like sets of three or something like that. Like,
Mhm.
how much more complicated, or maybe that's not stable, right? Like, maybe that isn't possible. But yeah, man, it's fascinating to think about. And I like that it feels like it opens the window to other life forms and possibilities that we genuinely cannot imagine.
Yeah.
That
Uh,
even opens up my mind to like, if you say there's different combinations and we base everything we know off the double helix, but if you introduce all these other things, what structures can quote unquote DNA and other life forms even take on? It would be crazy to kind of think about. Honestly, it's almost impossible to comprehend at that point.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's kind of an imaginative exercise, open-ended,
Yeah.
really.
Which is why I like it, right?
Yeah.
There's like no wrong answers.
So, Nick, shifting gears a little bit, I'm curious. This is something that we've talked about a couple of times on the show. This idea of endosymbiosis, right? That these complicated cellular structures that exist today that have these organelles, right? Like a nucleus and mitochondria, or chloroplasts. Like
Mhm.
the theory behind endosymbiosis suggests that once at one time these were all individual organisms that maybe one consumed the other, and then they developed this symbiotic, mutually beneficial relationship, and then continue to perpetuate on. And I guess the mitochondrial DNA in a cell differs. It's a completely different subset of DNA from nuclear DNA, the DNA that's in the nucleus of the cell, and that's kind of supporting evidence for this. I'm curious if you've kind of uncovered anything in that in your research or have a take on that.
I haven't. I don't look at stuff like that particularly, but I've heard very interesting things in that sense in that realm, and you can even go a bit deeper in that the sex of an organ or of a person or animal or whatever could also contribute to the makeup of some of that DNA. You know, mitochondrial DNA versus nucleic DNA, and then how much of that is built up based off of like what kind of organism you are, what role you play in the world, and you know whether you're obviously a bacteria is going to be drastically different than a eukaryotic cell. Proteosomes are going to be different. A reptile is going to be different than a giant fish. You know, probably more similar than a person um, would be to a reptile. So all these things are going to accumulate and cause differences. And there's so much nuance in that. If you're speaking on just a general level, you're saying, okay, there's a lot of similarities. There's a lot of differences in these DNA, RNA makeup, the organelles in there. But and I know a lot of people get really touchy about evolutionary stuff, but evolutionarily, what would be the advantages and disadvantages in different organs for this makeup of DNA in the different organisms that exist? You know, obviously, our need for mitochondrial DNA might differ drastically from what a fish needs, but we both
Mm,
still have it. So it's
mm,
like, yes, I would say there's probably a connection there in that some organelles consume others while cohabitate with others. But then you got to think on an organism level, why is it happening very similarly in all these different animals when it doesn't in our minds really have to do that way? Because I don't have to swim underwater. What's the difference there? Versus I can't fly in the sky. What's the difference there? It's like evolutionarily, I think everything has to be tied in together somehow,
Yeah.
even though we still have so many similarities on that level too.
mm,
Yeah. Yeah, man. Um that yeah, that's always interesting to me, thinking about the evolutionary aspect. And I think you gave like this really good example of the vending machine that is trying to read RNA and then like print out the stuff that you need next, whatever that means. And just mistakes happen, and sometimes the mistakes mean absolutely nothing and they do nothing, and sometimes they are so helpful that that organism has a better chance of surviving or reproducing, and then sometimes they're so harmful that it dies, right? Or it like loses out to some other organism that has a better combination or a better mutation or something. And it's I think it was always hard at first to understand that random nature of evolution, and that it wasn't like it wasn't racing towards a hierarchy, which is what it feels like when you're a human being that feels very superior to the other animals, because like
Yes.
we read and we write, we have a society and all
Mhm.
these things, and it feels like intelligence is the peak. And when we think about other civilizations, we always think about looking for advanced civilizations. But
Mhm.
it's like that's not like the end. That's just one random offshoot. And uh but it definitely feels like um when you really get into sci-fi and you're thinking about other life, we're looking for like somebody else at the top, like us.
This
Mhm.
apex.
This ape, yeah, and there
Apex
truly is
predator.
no such thing.
Mhm. What's crazy
Yeah.
too is that we take for granted the fact that we haven't even conceptualized everything that's out there. I just saw some the other day that they discovered a new organelle called a it's a it's hemafusosome. That's what they call it, hemafusosome. And it was discovered by a group out in Virginia. And it's a very, very small organelle used to eat up and destroy other materials in the cell. And I
Hmm.
literally saw this article last week, and it's like everybody. It's funny because now everybody makes memes about stuff. It's like, oh, humans just got to update. We just buffer. Now we updated. We learned something new about ourselves. But
Yeah,
it's like we don't even know everything about ourselves, and then we're trying to put everything we feel like we know, as if we know everything, into the context that just doesn't exist because we can't box everything in. Discovering a new organelle in 2025 would have never been on my bingo card.
yeah,
So
yeah, man. There's so much to learn. I wanted to ask you this as an immunologist. We've had a couple other biologists on recently,
mhm,
and I asked them as well. But it would be interesting to get your perspective specifically because you do immunology research, and that is on the increase that we see now in autoimmune diseases. And there's this, I mean, I'm sure are a number of reasons that, or a number of ways that you could explain that, but
mhm,
one of them is that our immune systems are like not getting the work, the practice that they typically have. You think about our ancestors that evolved to be in the wild, to be literally eating dirt. They weren't cooking their food before they harnessed fire. And,
mhm,
they were just there was a constant flux of bacteria and parasites just flowing into the body. And we really don't have it at the same level anymore. And that could pose problems for our immune system, which is
mhm,
used to actively every single day, probably being pushed to the brink.
mhm.
And that not having something, that constant threat at that same level, could produce a weird effect like an autoimmune disease that
Yeah.
attacks
Well,
yourself. And that,
I'll challenge
yeah,
you on that one, and
okay.
that I think part of it is a basic understanding of what an autoimmune disease is. There's several different things I can attribute to the increase, and I think one of the things a lot of people can say now is our ability to just test things now is way more advanced than it ever was before. So you can
Mhm.
discover these things better. But autoimmune disease, in its core, in its crux, is a disease that develops because your immune system is overacting. It's too strong. And so what it ends up doing is it lets cells that are usually deleted, because there's a whole identification process in your body that tells it, hey, I think this cell might not be one that we should actually create. It's what's called a positive and negative selection process of some of your immune cells. And so it'll go through this, screening process that will tell it, hey, you're good enough to go and fight whatever disease is out there, or hey, we think you're a little bit too strong, you might be dangerous for your own body. And so, in that analysis, you would think if you need a perfect balance in your body for autoimmunity to not exist, as well as able to fight off, whatever other disease, over time, I think us as people and us as a society, have developed so many tools and such an efficient way to fight off diseases that we've overstimulated our immune system. And so a lot
Mm.
of your immune cells that ideally would fight off these diseases or these bacteria or whatever are there, but too much. And the things that control that, which would be known as a regulatory T cell or a T reg, aren't enough of those to keep in check the strength of the immune system that you've developed to fight off other things. So now you might
Wait,
start
so
getting off target effects.
could you explain how we have overstimulated our immune systems? Do you mean through like the introduction of like lots of vaccines or something like that?
So I'm not saying we've this is all theoretical, but
Uh,
I think it could be a variety of things. So a vaccine is just one avenue of increased ability to um, train your immune system and fight off a disease, but it's very targeted. A vaccine is
mm,
specifically like, hey, we know what the virus is, we know what we need to protect you from, but we ourselves have opened up in a way our own immune systems to a society in which once you've developed your immune system enough, there's things you may not even know you have because your body's already just been trained, because maybe as a kid you fought it off, or maybe in daycare some kid was really sick and you was exposed to it at a young age. And there's so many different ways to get exposed to diseases. And then on top of that, unlike the relationship is, how is it different now from back in the day? We have
mhm,
better tools to medically treat people who would have typically died from those responses. So if someone was to be exposed for a number of reasons to a virus, a bacteria, or whatever, back in the day, you'd probably just be dead, and then there would be no training to effectively fight this off. Whereas
mm,
today, you can get the medical treatments necessary to continue living a successful life. But those immune responses from trying to protect yourself from all these different responses still exist, and they're still present, and it might be overactive, in which back in the day all those people would have never made it this far. Now we're seeing an increase in autoimmunity because your immune system is overly active for something that it never would have had to compete for back in the day. So you'll get
Mm.
off-target effects. You'll start get attacking on your own body. This is where you start to see diseases like multiple sclerosis attacking your nerves, rheumatoid arthritis attacking some of your nerve endings. You get type 1 diabetes attacking your islets of your pancreas. These things wouldn't exist before because you wouldn't have had to deal with an immune system that developed as advanced as it is now. So I think
Mm.
interesting.
theoretically that could be a push for an increase in autoimmunity, is that we
Mhm.
are victims of our own success, or our bodies are in this case. And now
Yeah,
we're addressing a problem we may have never even known existed due to the fact that we have advancements in medical
interesting.
care.
Yeah, yeah, man, that's really interesting. Speaking of being victims of our own success. We've talked about this before. I know you deal with this a lot as a science communicator, especially in what you study, right? That is directly related to vaccines and that sort of thing. You know, this administration comes out and says that like vaccines cause autism, and RFK is just saying all sorts of unhinged things. And I wanted to get your opinion on why you think something like uh, this anti-science, specifically in immunology, in medicine, vaccines, etc., it seems to be so like prevalent, pervasive now, specifically with the political attachment. It's like very political, and I wouldn't expect something like the way that our immune systems work to necessarily be a political topic.
Mhm. Yeah, so there's so many different factors that are involved in vaccine hesitancy, education for your own health and well being, and then also point blank who to trust. And I think our society has built around this idea that we should be able to trust higher ups because they have our best interest in mind. And I think a lot of us are seeing that structure break down, especially now with the current political climates. But I think the issue stems from a mix of a combination of a ton of things. Okay. So, one is just point blank lack of education isn't going to help anybody. Not being educated on these topics makes it difficult to know who to trust when there starts to become combating views on a lot of these topics. And so it is easy for political figures to utilize this as a point of contention to drive in more votes for their party and eventually take over, political offices. Another big thing that nobody, I think, can ignore is capitalism is always going to play a role. And both sides, people don't want to think about it, but or every side is always going to have a capitalistic gain point of view no matter how they approach it. So whether you're pro or anti-vaccines, at least in America, other countries might vary a little bit. There's always going to be a capitalistic ideology because we know for a fact insurance companies profit a ton of money from how they handle healthcare with Americans, and people will lose trust in that, and so it makes it difficult to believe the people you think are conning or scamming you. On the other end, there's people saying that they're wrong, you should trust me, and you'll say, well, if I don't trust a medical provider, I'll trust the person saying the medical provider's bad. That person
Right.
also has a capitalistic gain point of view as a politician. They get money, they need donors, they need positions in office, they might run companies that provide alternative solutions that have been discovered, like maybe a supplement or something that they could sell you, that will then help them get political gain. Both parties have somewhat capitalistic ideology involved, so it makes it difficult. And then on top of that, um, pitting people against each other just makes things more fiery. So right now, if you set up an environment where the academics and the people who are well established in their fields understand the need for these things, and the people that support this ideology are combating completely the people that are completely against it, anti-vax, anti, whatever, it just creates this divide where you can constantly utilize this hate for each other's ideology to better the gain of, the people in power, political forces that will make, gain from this. So it's perfect for them, and yet we keep butting heads. And the reality is, we all know I don't like being told I'm wrong. Nobody likes losing an argument, even if you with your friends at the crib, or you and your girl are arguing or whatever. Nobody likes to take that L and go, "Damn, you right, my bad, I was wrong, you had it." Like, nobody likes saying that. So nobody really likes to take that L when it comes to these arguments. So they're going to keep pushing, even if they're wrong, just so they
Yeah.
don't lose. Because the mentality of losing hurts more than a lot of things people realize. Um, and then I think the last component that really ties into this, and there's a lot of this more heavily towards marginalized communities, and women, and things in which medical care providers and researchers historically have utilized marginalized groups and taken advantage of marginalized groups for the betterment of their research or their, capitalistic gain or whatever it is. And so to come full circle back and just tell these people, hey, we're telling you the truth, just believe us. uh, you think about the Tuskegee, the syphilis experiments with all of those men.
Hmm.
Why would their families in their right mind ever trust medical and research provide, or, care and research providers or whatever ever again
Yeah.
after they've been slighted in the worst way possible? It's a
Mhm.
hard thing to redeem yourself for, just to say now, oh, I actually care about y'all now. Well, you didn't care then. Why you care now? So it's
Right.
a lot of conflicting
Mhm.
views and opinions and beliefs, and whether truth or fiction come together and make it very difficult to believe what is actually right, especially in this vaccine hesitancy, in this political climate.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
really appreciate that. My bad.
Oh no,
Go
you got
ahead.
it.
Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, man, I definitely appreciate that take, and
I was literally about to say that. You
yeah.
copycat.
And I think that one of the other pieces of the pie, right, is that there's this other cohort, which I guess is kind of aligned with the don't trust the experts cohort, which is like, well, you can't trust the scientists either, right? Because the scientists are, I think we talked about this before on the show. Like, I guess at some point during your graduate program, you're indoctrinated into the machine.
Mm.
Yeah.
And in that process, you are given a huge check,
Big
and you're
bang.
given a script to read,
Big
and then
bang.
at that point you're just propagating all this, all this propaganda,
Yeah.
and profiting off of it hugely. But I think that's a common misconception as well. But I mean, like, That doesn't happen, right, Nick? Or I don't know. Did you
So
experience that?
this has been my viewpoint, and I've probably jaded a lot of people in the world that I know to this, because I do believe there is a quote unquote machine, and I do believe there's a quote unquote indoctrination process. I don't believe we get paid from it. I believe we
Mm,
actually get screwed by it.
Damn. That's the
Uh,
good part.
I think we get screwed just as much, if not more, than the people who believe this machine exists. But the reason why I say it exists is I think for grad students, PhD students, they start to realize it around year 4, maybe a little bit after the committee exam. And
Mhm.
medical students probably start to realize it around year 3, maybe year 4, that a lot of these people go into these fields with the idea that we can change the world, right? We can
mhm,
save lives, we can fix our communities, we can help be the change we need to see. Because that's what it teaches a kid: be the change you want to see. We believe we can go into our communities, save grandma, save grandpa, help your cousins out, help your best friends out. And then you get in the field saying, I'm finally there. I spent years studying. Spent years figuring out medicine, research. How do I get it done? I want to go back home and I want to help my family. And then they tell you, well, first you got to see the patient. Then we have to go reach out to their insurance providers, discuss if it's possible to do these treatments. If it is possible, we might want to adjust the medicine so it's not as high as the amount that you believe would actually cure them. We can't really afford that. We want to adjust, and then you start realizing, oh, I don't have any say. I actually am just a piece in the machine. I can help people, quote unquote. They come see me, but I think people will see a lot now. There's a lot of medical providers who are coming out and saying, I can't even give the care I would like to, because there's forces that are preventing me from doing what I would believe is best as a recommendation. The same goes for research, and there's research projects people would fully invest in, but if you can't get an NIH R1 grant worth $2 million to help you study that for the next 4 to 5 years, you can't do it. And even if you can, you have to pin it as a specific story, studying a specific thing in small incremental amounts, to where you wouldn't even be able to do the research you want to make cures on cures left and right to save your community. And so at that point, you're so deep entrenched in the game that you're just like anyone else. I need to make a check to feed my family and keep it moving. But the machine's not handing out $1 million checks. They paying you the same salary everybody else getting. We get 60K, 70K, 80K, and you living in San Francisco, New York, Boston. You living paycheck to paycheck like everybody else.
mm,
So what you just described, like this enormous cumbersome system that's also like bloated and screwed up, because in the US we have a very for-profit healthcare system, which is probably like worse off than many other countries where people spend less money on healthcare but end up being more healthy. And totally understand that you're really like a cog in that machine. But that does sound to me like in practice different than like this sort of boogeyman indoctrination machine
Mhm.
that Justin was referring to, where literally it's like, that actually the stuff that you're doing is making people sick. You're doing
Mhm.
it on purpose and you're
Mhm.
getting a check because of it. It's
Yeah.
like, it sounds like what you're describing is more so like being introduced to this enormous, massive system that moves very slowly and that you do have very little power for it. And there are people who are trying to make a lot of money. And within that system, you can't move much, but you don't really sound like you're indoctrinated. This is
No,
not the way that people who
no,
are indoctrinated by a system speak about it.
not at all. No, I don't think that the indoctrination that people believe exists. I know for a fact it doesn't, because many of the people I know, including myself, we don't get paid tons of money. They actually want to keep you as poor as possible so you can still feed your family and keep working and keep becoming this cog in this machine. I won't say as poor as possible, but it is. You're not going to make out like a bandit, because if you made enough money, you would leave a toxic system, as most people ideally would, um, and then go pursue something else, depending on your moral
Mm.
values. Moral values is something that I think needs to be thought of a little bit in this situation. And the reality is, in every industry, the problem is a couple bad apples will ruin it for the entire group. And there are some people who may have that advantage that I'm not aware of. And there's very few industries where you can have a bad apple that gets away with it. Like you, if you're a pilot, you can't have a bad apple pilot because everybody on the plane gonna die. So it's just not it's not possible. But on the police force, you can have a couple bad apples and they might get through and slide and nobody notice. In the industry field, you might have a couple bad apples who, lie their way up the chain and then start taking positions of power because they want the money. It happens. It's a part of knowing that everybody's moral compass is going to be drastically different depending on how they were brought up and depending on what they value.
Mm,
Yeah.
that's a fascinating take. You know, Nick, I guess the other thing that comes to mind though is, and I think this is a common, I'd say a common complaint or an outcry of people that claim that there's this indoctrination happening, is that, there are, I think, a large subset of these medical professionals that they believe are incentivized to not be whistleblowers, to not keep their mouths, to keep their mouths shut about the injustices that they're seeing that are going on. And they might argue that the voices that you're speaking about that are highlighting some of these injustices are kind of like these bold exceptions to that are speaking out against it, and maybe that have decided to stop benefiting from it.
Mhm. That's an interesting viewpoint. I think it's possible that that could be happening. I'd say it's really rare that you would have a bunch of people getting paid to keep quiet about injustices. There might be people committing these injustices, so that would be motivation to stay quiet if you're doing it. And then I think the real thing would be a lot of people in these fields are trained on their techniques and abilities to provide medical care or perform research or XYZ. The ability to communicate injustices is a completely different skill entirely, which one comes with understanding of what the injustice is, which quite frankly, if we ask a lot of white people what they believe an injustice is towards a black person, they would all have different answers to that question. um, and then on top of that, most of the people that you see go into these fields are not trained to communicate properly to the public on this ideology that's occurring. So it becomes very difficult to even convey what you see because one, you don't know what stream, to convey this viewing point to. Everybody thinks maybe you could just post it on TikTok. You might not get heard. Um, Two, if you go through the proper protocols, which would probably be going through your employers, setting up, specific protocols to write up people and make sure you're putting that complaint out. A lot of those might get washed out depending on who you're making the complaint about. If it's a high up person, they may tell you to leave because they don't want to get rid of someone who's bringing in a ton of money. It's so many things that can happen. And at the end of the day, I think people will always upheld self preservation over community service for others, to save others. If I knew my job was on the line, not me specifically, but if someone knew their job was on the line versus saying, "Hey, I see Doctor So and So seems to be mistreating, women who are delivering babies a little bit differently than he should," a lot people will probably lean more towards preserving their job because they know that's how they're going to survive. So there's just
Mm.
so much nuance to these things that it becomes difficult to really address. Not everybody's built to be an activist, and that's going to hinder a lot of that, problem.
Yeah. No, I think that that's such an interesting take, man. Because like another thing that just comes to mind as you were saying it is this notion, and this is like right up your alley, right? Antibiotics are like hugely overprescribed in the United States, and like Dakota, I don't know if you've ever had this experience, like visiting the doctor and like not being clear on what was wrong, but someone's like, "Yeah, just take some antibiotics, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like that'll address it." And it's like, well, this it could be a virus, and based on my understanding, antibiotics like they're for bacteria, not viruses. Maybe Nick, you can correct me if I'm wrong on that.
You're right.
Um, but but I think like I feel like I've had the experience of like, just because I do have a background in science and I do feel relatively comfortable asking doctors scientific questions. I'll kind of be like, hey, I don't really need these antibiotics, right? And I feel like sometimes I might not even get a clear answer from that doctor. And I guess that's probably a byproduct of the things that you're discussing.
Mhm. Yeah, I like to mess with doctors because they will assume I don't know much, and so I'll ask like small questions like, "Oh, so how does this drug work?" And they'll say, "Oh, this is what it does." And I say, "So by what pathway?" And they go, "Oh, pathway. What you know about pathways?" Like, what is it inhibiting? What is the process? What is the protein of interest? What's the target? And that's when
Yeah.
people start to go, "Oh, the guy, he knows something." Oh, and I want to know, don't just tell me, "Oh, this drug will help you with this." Tell me how. What's the receptors going to act on? How does it work? What is it blocking? If it's doing that, there must be other targets that, I might need these receptors for that might lead to these side effects. What's happening here? And so I like to test doctors, because the reality is a lot of these doctors are not trained on giving you specifics like that, because most people are not going to care about specifics or know the specifics like that. But it goes to show that the training and education for communication is lacking in terms of how to turn on and off the switch, um,
Mm.
of what is the advanced level information versus the small level way to communicate it and tell people what's really going on. Like you said, somebody would just say, "Oh, antibacterial clean up," and I was like, "Well, why antibacterial? That stops bacteria, but I think I have a viral infection. So why are we not prescribing something for a virus?" And if you can't give me a valid explanation for that, you would just think, "Oh," you could tell somebody, "Oh, it'll work either way." But I said, I know for a fact that doesn't work for viruses. So let's be more realistic. Let's give me a valid reason. Like, give me a real reason. Communicate with me here.
Yeah.
But
Mm.
I think people take advantage of that because, one, they either don't know how to communicate, or two, there's there's just so much volume of patients compared to doctors that they're just trying to get people in and out as quick as possible. So you're
Mm.
not going to try and spend the time with every patient to explain those nuances. Yeah.
Yeah, man. Like the volume thing is another important piece of the puzzle. So, this is kind of a future oriented question, Nick, or just like even a conversation topic. So, telehealth and telemedicine.
Mm.
I don't know if we talked about this at all on Curiosity
I don't
Theory.
think we have yet. No.
So this idea that you can now use apps and your camera app on your phone. Like let's say you have a rash, you can take a picture of it on your phone and get the equivalent of like a medical diagnosis virtually for a lot of these things.
Mhm.
Combined with technologies like AI technologies like IBM Watson that have demonstrated the capability to diagnose based on photographic evidence conditions that people have at a higher rate of success than
IBM
doctors.
Watson.
IBM Watson is an artificial. It's an AI supercomputer that is designed to do a lot of different things. But one of the things that it's been trained to do is diagnose like medical phenomena.
Yeah.
And so it's in some instances, and I probably want to do some more research to fact check myself.
Mm.
But it's able to outperform specialists in their fields
Yeah, I know
on
what
the
you're talking about.
diagnoses. And so like this combined with this notion of telehealth, like not having to physically go into an office that might be crowded full of people where
Mhm.
the doctors are trying to get you in and out, may lead to in the future like higher quality outcomes for people as it pertains to medicine.
Yeah.
I feel like you're a lot closer to this though, Nick, and I'd just be curious about kind of your take on that whole space.
I think it could be revolutionary if the tools were working properly. Now I say
Mm,
that because I don't think things are working properly, because I always think on the back end there always has to be an expert to influence the final decision, or expert even to influence AI's final decision if it's an AI program at the end of the day. Because I think you'll still run into the same issues of, if you let an AI just diagnose everybody, it will also be based off the training it got, where from doctors who are dealing with high volume, quick, get them in and out, thing, and they may misdiagnose people as well. So it really depends on that final say from an expert. Now, the problem you run into is, I don't know how many other people have shared similar, experiences. I remember a while ago I was having issues with my foot. I woke up, I stood up, it hurt like crazy. I couldn't walk. I just couldn't move. So I said, I need a doctor, but I can't drive. I can't get to my car to drive. So I call in, I do the telehealth thing. And the person I talked to was a nurse. No knock to nurses, they're great, but they can't diagnose you based off the symptoms that I can tell. So she ended up saying, I'm not exactly sure what it is. You probably should come in and see a provider. I just told you I can't move. How I'm gonna come in? So then
You can't hop, bro. You got 2 legs.
yeah, you got a backup leg, so you
should
should
have crawled
probably.
to the car or something. I don't know. Uh, so I end up going to one of them urgent cares. I got help. Somebody helped me. Got my girl. She helped me get there. Go to the urgent care. I see the provider at the urgent care. Also, not a doctor. Uh, there was a nurse practitioner, and
Hmm.
she basically was saying, "I don't know for sure, but based off what you're saying, I think you might have gout." I'm like, "Whoa, hold on now." That feels like a drastic jump. But she was like, you need the proper blood work, so you're still gonna have to go to your primary care provider. So throughout this entire process, I spent a day in pain, all these things, and mind you, I don't want to go to the ER because that's one of the worst places next to the DMV. I'm finding every way around this, and at the end of the day, all they told me was to go in and see my doctor anyway. So it ends up becoming a problem in that I still think trained personnel needs to be behind the telehealth, which ends up being doctors, and the shortage of doctors versus the volume of people still ends up being the main issue.
Mm.
Maybe you could train AI to shorten a lot of this process because you might have a lot of people who come in and say they have a problem that's not that big a problem, and AI could clear that out pretty quickly. Um, but I
Well,
think,
AI is really good at pattern recognition. There's like things that it's really good at and things that it kind of sucks at, right? And
Mhm,
it seems like one of the things that it would be phenomenal at is recognizing like whether be it through symptoms or some sort of imaging or something an irregularity that
yeah,
is consistent with
mhm,
something else. And
mhm,
maybe in the case of like an x-ray or an MRI, it can quickly spot things very easily,
mhm,
but when it comes to like talking to a person, and I guess people don't always know the proper pain level that they're experiencing, or it can be hard to describe a sensation.
mhm.
Then I definitely see how you need the like the personal touch of a human being, like a human medical professional. But it
Yeah, and
seems
I
like
like.
in some cases AI would be like an elite tool that would be, I guess, wielded by a
Mhm.
doctor.
I like how you said that too. I feel like imaging would be amazing for it. Imaging, X-rays, any of those things. Now and then that's basically AI side by side as a tool with for a medical professional. And at that point, I think you're utilizing it in the best capacity possible. I think it's not about replacement. I think it's more about
Yeah.
increasing the tools that the people could use. And that's how I view AI is having the professionals with better tools, a better hammer, a better drill, a better, a nail gun that works efficiently. That's what I view AI as, not as a replacement. Get rid of the contractor entirely and just put a bunch of hammers and nails and stuff in a room and say, get it done. Like that's that's what AI
Mhm.
is to me. So
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah, man. So switching up slightly, gotta talk about this, gotta ask you about this. Um, I know a couple things about you. I know you're a black man, I know you're an immunologist. I know that people must ask you quite often about the infamous Dr. Sebi.
Wow, I was just about to ask about that.
Were you?
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
uh,
He's infamous. Nipsey Hussle shouted him out in a song or two, and there may or may not have been mysterious circumstances around his death. I don't know. But I figure that you get this often. Do you have any takes, any
yeah,
thoughts?
this y'all are pushing me. This might be the first online presence, discussion I have about Dr. Sebi because I've been putting it off for quite some time. Um,
You
but
popping your Sebi
yeah, yeah,
cherry?
yeah.
Okay.
The Sebi cherry has been popped. I gotta bring it up. Um, I understand the reason why somebody like Dr. Sebi would be so influential in the black community because as we mentioned before, there's so much distrust amongst the black community and other marginalized communities and medical providers. As we brought up the syphilis experiments that were done in black men specifically, it becomes difficult to trust the care that you get. So you get a savior. Everyone wants to put their hopes and dreams in a person, a savior, and the black community does it very often. We all have icons that we entrust to carry the community. You got Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Obama, and then even outside of political and activist figures, you got hip hop and R&B artists. You've got athletes, LeBron James. We put our hopes and dreams in these people to guide us to a quote unquote promised land. And Dr. Sebi is no different in terms of a hope that people have for a way to care and show love and treat the symptoms of their friends and family and keep them safe. And so what he did was utilize black pain and people's pain points when it came to health to make a buck. That's what we call a con artist. So, in a very blunt, not so blunt way, Dr. Sebi was one of the biggest con artists to the black community. I know a lot of people will be upset about that because they saw Nipsey Hussle bring a lot of attention to this point, talking about a lot of the things that Dr. Sebi, and I've been seeing something lately. It's been driving me crazy. I've seen two videos now. This girl who's not even black; it's a white girl promoting a product and then talking about it, and she's talking about how Dr. Sebi discussed this idea that mucus and inflammation are the two biggest known diseases. They're the only diseases. Everything else is just a symptom of mucus and inflammation. That is so flawed to tell people that because they will then believe the only way they can be cured is to clear out inflammation and clear out mucus. The problem with that
Yeah.
is both mucus and inflammation are healing processes. Without them, you can get more sick. So, um,
Dang, so no, so like I always feel like you had that mucus disease. You don't have mucus disease?
The mucus
Yeah,
disease,
it just sounds like some like
you got the
BS.
mucus,
That
you got
right?
the mucus
then like
joints.
that sounds like a childhood like elementary school bully.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, bro, you got that mucus disease.
Yeah, it's like it strikes the same chord as chemicals. We put all these chemicals in our body
Mhm.
when like H2O is it's a chemical.
It's a
Like
chemical.
Right.
it's all chemicals,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
It's all chemicals. But
Mhm.
so you like his thing, yeah, it's right. It's mucus and inflammation. But you know what you just said was that mucus, the production of mucus and the response of inflammation are both immune responses when you are like injured or sick, right, or have an
Mhm.
infection or something like that.
Mhm.
So this is like a part of your body's healing process.
Yes.
But it seems like he just like yeah, the mucus thing always blew my mind because
So
then he, uh huh,
it it go it's and when you could go back to the vaccine stuff, you could talk even today's argument about Tylenol and autism, all this stuff that's happening. It's all correlation. If you're sick, you have mucus. If you're sick, you have inflammation. Therefore, mucus and inflammation must be the problem.
mm-hmm,
Um, and it makes it easy to tell people that because it's true. If you have illness, mucus and inflammation will be there. And so it's easy to convince someone that that's the problem. But that's also becomes a problem with causation and correlation. There, you can't causation does not equal correlation, right?
right.
Um, and I saw something recently. Somebody in my lab showed me. It's a funny joke that I like to discredit the causation correlation because some people really hold tight to this, and it was that apparently people who eat margarine are less likely to get divorced. So if you are in a household and you eat margarine, you're gonna have a healthy marriage. Does that even sound like
Sounds pretty causal.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah. You're a
margarine
margarine
saved
guy
your
or
No,
marriage?
I'm not a margarine guy.
you
Hell
spoken
no.
like a margarine guy.
Hell no, man. You be a stick of butter.
Margarine saved your marriage. You was on the brink. Everybody told you, man, take your wife to Turks and Caicos, buy her nice gifts, that'll
Mm,
save you. You said, no, I'm gonna just keep eating this margarine. Like
yeah.
it doesn't make sense, right? And it's just
Mm,
because the things are there, your household might have margarine, and you also have a very toxic relationship. They are
Yeah.
existing separately, but they're in the same thing, you know? It's the
yeah.
same with inflammation. Mucus exists in the same body that is infected by XYZ disease
Whatever else.
and trying to fix the problem.
Yeah,
So,
right. So the interpretation there then is not that that mucus and inflammation is causing the illness. It's that there must be a series or a large number of diseases, viruses, bacteria, whatever conditions that trigger a the production of mucus or
Mhm.
inflammation. And I think that's important to point out there because, as scientists, it feels like we say all the time causation is not correlation. And it can be actually quite difficult to prove causation a lot of times. Like
Mhm.
many times when you hear interpretations of statistics, what actually has been found is correlation. Like it's very difficult to
Mhm.
scientifically prove that A triggers and causes B.
Mhm.
And it's possible to do, but it's extremely difficult to do. Even things that we understand quite well, oftentimes are actually just correlated.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Causation is one of the hardest things you could possibly find because the amount of times you have to repeat it in the same condition, same way, no
Mhm.
variation to ensure that that thing is what causes that issue is just, it's astronomical and it makes it very difficult, which is why a lot of research is based off inferences of repeated results that we can say we believe this leads to this based off of how many times we repeated XYZ experiment.
Mhm.
They can't
Right.
even
Yeah.
say for sure it will be this. We still have to
Yeah.
say it very likely is this because
And it
and the problem with as a scientist and medical provider is you cannot ever give absolutes because even in
mhm.
statistics, nothing is absolute. It's a confidence interval, usually a 95% confidence interval, which means there's 5% chance that that may not occur. So you can never
Yeah.
give someone 100% this will always happen if you do it this way.
And that's another one of the, I think, unfortunate things when talking about science, especially in medicine, but overall, it's that when you hear a scientist talk, they're always doing these like caveats and they're always like
Mhm.
bracing you for the fact that we don't know this to be a 100% fact, right? I mean,
Mhm.
by definition, we know that theories can't be proven. No theory can ever be complete. And so any responsible scientist is always going to be speaking with like some level of certainty, but not absolute certainty.
Mhm.
But then you got like these charlatans, somebody
Dr.
like
Sebi.
RFK come on, yeah, right? They'll come and they'll speak with 100% absolute certainty. Look, the scientists don't know what they're talking about. See, they made a mistake here, and then this other thing happened in science back then. And it's like really unfortunate because we respond so well to a confident and charismatic leader.
Right. Here's a guy with some conviction.
He
Finally,
knows,
these
yeah.
bumbling scientists are mucking around. They never have a clear answer for me. But
Right.
this guy knows what he's talking about. He's
Yeah.
not. He's not skating around with this. He
Right.
knows exactly what he means.
And
Yeah.
the problem
Yeah. Which
is our rebuttal can't be confidence because we can't. We literally cannot. So you have to let so and
Mm,
so beat their chest, and you still have to say, I mean, there might be a possibility, but
yeah.
so Nick, and it's another thing that I wanted to get your take on. It's an interesting polarizing figure in the science community that also has a podcast, right? This guy, Dr. Andrew Huberman, right? He's a Stanford professor and has this huge podcast now, Huberman Lab. I've definitely listened to a couple of episodes of Huberman
I've
Lab
listened
myself.
before. Yeah.
And I kind of I've appreciated the premise of it, like kind of empowering people through knowledge of neuroscience. But I think it kind of evolved into this like hacking angle, and he interviewed like a lot of entrepreneurs and like quote unquote high performers, and tries to, I think, attach neuroscience narratives to some of the outcomes they've been able to achieve. And then I think where, I mean, we're kind of all in the science communication community. I
Mhm.
think where he kind of like, I think a lot of the SciComm community fell out of love with Andrew Huberman is when he started to promote some of these more wellness oriented products with
Mhm.
the accreditation of like being this person with a PhD that is this trusted voice of science that, may not even have an expertise in this thing, but he's going to tell you with
Mhm.
conviction, like, hey, this thing does XYZ, right?
Yeah.
What's your take on Huberman, man?
It's interesting because I always thought dude was a con artist before I looked into his back. I straight up was like, dude is promoting AG1 greens and telling people you drink AG1 greens, you gonna look like Popeye. Like it's just not, it don't make sense. Things don't work that way. I mean, I know Dakotah might be able to do that, and the next thing you know, he in the gym swole and everything. But I need a couple more AG1 greens than he do. So, but it just don't seem realistic. But then I looked into him, right? I looked into him. You see that credibility that him. You got names like Stanford behind his name, big university. A lot of people know Stanford. He got a PhD. You have a PhD, you
Mhm.
can call yourself a doctor. That's credibility. And I just made a post about this the other day. I said, if doctors really, if you're talking about go back to that indoctrination and receiving that check, I said, if doctors really wanted to make a killing, they would go into things like selling products and supplements and all that because they know just enough information to be dangerous to where they can tell you something that can't fully be proven as a no and then sell you on the dream of the yes, right? So
Mhm.
we all know, everybody is well aware, if you have your greens and you eat right and you got broccoli and carrots and all these veggies and stuff, if you do that, you should be healthy. Doesn't mean you're always gonna be healthy, but whatever. And so he could, and then you could say, oh, there's also relations between your gut and your brain, and if you have an effective diet and help heal your gut, you're gonna have great thinking processes, more dopamine for your ability to be happier. All these things, and you can start making all these correlations. Again, correlation doesn't equal causation, but you can start making all these correlations, and we can't, as real researchers, say you're wrong, but we also know you're not saying it based in actual facts from proven research studies, peer reviewed scientific research studies. It's all living in this world of ambiguity. And so, what people
Yeah,
like,
like this plausible deniability.
yes,
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
yes,
like taking the gray area of scientific research and using that to your advantage to
right,
basically sell things that can't be entirely disproven, that don't really discredit you, but
hmm
like from a ethical standpoint as a professional in the field, it kind of doesn't favor well among other professionals that are
Right.
like, hey, that's not something that you probably should be advising people to do,
exactly.
but the podcast generates a ton of revenue.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And on top of that, fear. You feed into fear and feed into people's pain points, you can make a ton of money. And so a lot of people nowadays have this idea that their brain isn't working properly. They're not as happy as they want to be. They're not as sick.
Only using 10% of it.
Oh
Yes.
yeah, I
Only
remember
using
that.
10% of their
You
brain.
gotta do the
Unlock your
what was
brain's
that
full
movie?
potential.
Um Limitless, with the dude with the pill and unlock
Yeah,
the
yeah.
rest of his brain. Yeah,
Yeah, bro discovered Adderall literally.
Yeah, I love that movie. I love that movie, by the way. I really like Limitless. But yeah, he discovered Adderall.
He just has ADHD and he discovered Adderall.
The next thing you know, you unlock 90% of your brain, and yeah.
Yeah.
Why was
So
that such a myth for so long? I remember always hearing that growing up. That
what
we only use
the
10% of
10%?
our brain and that the only time people use 100% is when they're having a seizure. That's what
Oh, is that
that
the
was
part?
like the myth
I
that
never
I
heard that
heard.
part. Hmm.
Which is like
And again,
obviously
it
not
goes
true.
into, those are things we literally can't prove. So you could say it and nobody could back it up. There's no way we
Right?
would be able to literally know what the percentage of your brain is being utilized at all times. Like,
And what
it's
does that
very
even mean?
yeah, it's very ambiguous, and so you could feed off
Yeah.
that and tell people that, and then they could just, now we in grade school in the playground talking about, yo, I'm using only 10% of my brain, but my brain bigger than yours, so I got bigger 10%. Like, it could be whatever.
Now you're doing phrenology, measuring skull sizes. That's crazy.
Dang.
So, but so to that, human point, and I see it a lot in neuroscience based science communication, is that you can feed into those pain points of people thinking they're not happy, not using their brain right, maybe they're depressed, whatever, and then you could sell them on the idea that, oh, like his stuff with AG1 or whatever, if you consume this product, it can help boost these things in your brain, help boost your thought process, help boost your dopamine levels. I, as a researcher, cannot say it will or won't because I can't have that conviction in your product. One, I don't even know what's in your product. And then
Mhm.
two, I have not tested it or seen proper studies to test to say it can or can't do that. So I have to say to you, hey, I wouldn't advise people. That's not a right thing to say to advise people. But I still can't say you're wrong because you might be right. And I would look stupid if someone actually did the studies and he was right. And that becomes the issue, in that if a researcher or a medical care provider decided to cross that line and then say, I'm just going to start living in that ambiguity, that gray area, because I'd rather make the profit. The few bad eggs or few bad apples in the bunch, they're going to make a killing because they're more definitive and they have that
Mm.
confidence, that it factor, you know?
Mm.
So I guess yeah, a lot of scientists miss out on the opportunity to have the it factor because they can't speak with that conviction.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah,
I can
man, you
say
gotta
it as
pick your
loud as I
poison.
want, but at the end of the day, I have to say, I believe statistically, based off of the evidence that I found, that it's very likely that I might be right.
That definitely doesn't hit as
It don't
hard.
hit the same. It don't hit the same. Nick, man, I'm curious, how did you get into immunology, like biology? Was there something that sparked your interest early on? Did you come to
Yeah,
it later in
you want
life?
the short story or the long story? How you want to do this?
I mean, the floor is yours, my man.
So, I always loved science as a kid. I liked the crime scene investigation shows. That was what I loved as a kid. I used to watch, Criminal Minds and CSI, all that stuff,
Mhm.
and I would watch with my family. My mom and dad and I would sit at TV and watch, and I loved it. Everybody, I used to tell people I wanted to be a forensic scientist, crime scene investigation, and forensic science. I want to do all that stuff. And people tell me, it's not like the show. It's way different. I said, I know. Don't tell me. I know the show is fake, but it still looks fun. And to the point where I was like, when I got to viewing colleges, I was looking at programs that offer like forensic science components. I shadowed forensic scientists in their background, learning what they do, blood splatter analysis, DNA analysis, all that stuff. And I enjoyed it. I loved it.
You
But
gotta keep my eye on you, man. I'm
so
getting Dexter vibes a little
yeah, it
bit.
was it was like that for a while. I don't know if I wanted to use it for nefarious things. I just thought it was cool to solve
Yeah,
a
yeah,
crime. I like the whole idea of being the guy who solved the crime.
yeah.
Um,
It's dope, man.
through
It's
yeah,
literal detective work through
exactly.
science. Yeah.
Exactly. And I love that aspect. And I was a smart kid, science kid, whatever, science, math. Those are my go-tos. I wasn't a big fan. I did well in school in general, but I wasn't a big fan of reading, writing, literature, arts. Like, I never really thought of myself as creative growing up. So that I was drawn to the sciences. My life took a drastic turn when I was a junior. My dad passed away. He passed away from an asthma attack. It was the day after Christmas. I had a huge basketball tournament that day, and I ended up not being able to make it because we had to rush him to the hospital. And he unfortunately couldn't make. He didn't, survive. And so from that point, I said, forensic science is cool and all, but I don't want anyone to have to go through what I went through because that pain was tough. And so if I could save a life, I want to be able to do that. But I didn't want to be a doctor because the doctors that we were working with my dad, I absolutely hated them. Like, I hated how they
Mm,
operated. There was a time where they told us he was going to be fine. Then they came back later and said, actually, he's passed away. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, why would you give
Mm.
us that false hope? Like, why, all this stuff. And I hated doctors, absolutely hated them. So I said, I want to be the guy who discovers the cure. I don't want to be the guy administering the cure. I want to discover the cure. And so from there, I decided to pursue biochemistry. I don't know why, but in my head, I just thought people that make drugs do biochemistry. Made sense to me. My mom thought I was crazy. She said, "Why aren't you going to do forensics anymore?" I said, "Don't worry about it. I'm going to be that guy. I'm going to be him."
Oh,
I
okay, so
love the
he's
confidence.
got the it factor.
You
He
got
does
the
have
it
it.
factor.
I'm
Uh,
going to be him. Little did I know, biochemistry was one of the hardest things I ever did in my life. I mean, you talk about C's get degrees. I struggled throughout college. It was not my forte, but in my head, this is all I had. I had to figure this out. This is all I knew. I didn't know, like, I didn't have people telling me what research was. I didn't have people telling me about PhDs, none of that. I ended up getting into a research program in college called the IMSD, is the Initiative for Maximizing Student Diversity program. And the idea of the program, I was at the University of Missouri in Columbia. Um, and the idea of this program was to help underrepresented students get into PhD programs. But at the start, I didn't care about none of that. What they told me is that we'll pay you to work in a research lab. I said, I like money, sure. And I get some experience, let's talk. So I ended up doing that. And through that program, where something I started just to kind of make extra money in college while I'm working towards my career, I ended up learning about science, research, doing my own research project, presenting at conferences, the whole thing that everybody is well aware of, I think, at this point. But it was something I knew nothing about before that. I ended up becoming a mentor in the program, mentoring the younger students when I was a junior and senior, like all that. And then I said at the end of my senior year, I don't know what else to do, so I'm gonna just go get a PhD because that's what this whole program was designed to do. So I said I'm gonna just apply to PhD programs. I applied to a bunch of programs, got denied to everywhere I applied except one, the one program that accepted me, um, and I took it. And it was in St. Louis, and it was a umbrella program, a biomedical sciences umbrella program based in four different departments. So it was pharmacology and physiology, pathology, biochemistry, and molecular microbiology and immunology. Those are the four departments. I said I don't want to do biochem again because I barely passed through college. I pathology didn't know much about, and pharmacology physiology is the one that felt like most related to, discovering diseases. So I said that's the one I'm doing. I'm gonna join the pharm phys department. So the way the program works is you spend 1 year um, working in the classwork and everything, working on the different parts of the class, and then you rotate in different labs. And through these rotations, you would decide which department to join based off which professor's lab you end up joining. And there was one guy I wanted to work for. He was the only black professor there, and he was in the pharm phys department. And he didn't have enough funding to take me, so I was kind of at a loss. Like I might take a L here and have to drop out of grad school. And in my very last rotation, I rotated for this guy in the immunology department, and I loved the research. And I said, okay. And he was a tough guy. He was very football coach esque vibes for a scientist, which is a rare combination to see. But the man
Definitely.
treats science like a football coach would treat the game, or a basketball coach would treat the game.
Had you in there doing push-ups, running
Borderline.
laps?
So he even today he calls reading papers, doing push-ups. So he'll come in, he'll say, "How many push-ups you did today?" And I'm like, he said, "You need to get on your push-ups. Start reading those papers." Like it's very and like very regimented, strict. A lot of people
Brute
told me he might be a
force.
little too tough for
Brute
me.
force.
I said, "Ain't nothing too tough for me." My dad passed away. I've struggled. I've seen everything you could throw at me. Ain't no man gonna break me. God forbid a man break me. I am the man. Come on now. Biggest mistake I ever made. that man broke me, worked me up, broke me again, worked me up. Uh, but his idea was, I don't want any old scientist. I want the best scientists in my lab, and I won't settle for
Mm.
anything else. So if you're joining my lab, be prepared. Be prepared to be the best. A
I ain't
lot
gonna
of
lie, I
people,
kind of like this guy.
Yeah, I like this guy.
I kind of like this guy.
a lot of people don't
Uh,
know what that means. But I have that mindset because I always felt that. Like
mm,
and it might be a little bit to a toxic level, but I subscribe to the ideology of like Kobe Bryant. Like you got to be 4 a.m. in the gym before everybody else. You
Oh
got
yeah,
to
we,
leave
we
it.
do too. You in
That's
good company, Nick.
yeah,
yeah,
you
You in
definitely.
good
that's how
company.
I think. That's how I move. Sometimes it's detrimental to my mindset, but that's just how you move, That's and I can't quit because every minute I take a break, someone's getting better than me. And I hate the idea that someone's being better than me. I hate the idea of losing out to someone else. I hate the idea of failing because I didn't do enough. And so this guy was perfect, but I didn't know what that meant because
Mhm,
this guy was another level. Like he is a scientist through and through, but also like he treats it like a sport. He's like, this is what it
mhm.
takes to be the best. You get some data back, but 5 o'clock hits, so you want to go home. He said 5 o'clock, I'll check it tomorrow. He come in, he said, how do you sleep at night? You've got all this data to look at, and you want to go home? How do you sleep? I wouldn't be able to go to sleep till I was done looking at this. Like the guy takes it serious, yo.
I like this
So
guy.
Yeah, I mean that's who I want. That's who I want doing my immunology research. Give me
so
the black mamba of immunology.
yeah, so that's the story of how I ended up joining immunology. It started with me
Mhm,
wanting to do pathology, but after my dad or forensic science, but after my dad passed, I wanted to do something more meaningful and help with like discovering cures. And then I
mhm,
went through this undergraduate research program for minority students that really helped me get to that understanding of what research was. And then I said, I'm just going to take the leap of, I honestly didn't even know what I was getting myself into, but I'm going to just do a PhD program because it makes sense to just knock all the education out while I'm still young and on the back
Mhm.
end, I still have so much life to live to do what I want to do. And then I just happened to meet this guy, and it happened to be I loved his research and I loved his mindset, and I asked to work for him. People told me not to. They said, "I don't know if you're gonna be ready to deal with a guy like him." And I said, "Nobody is tougher than me."
Hmm.
I don't
Yeah.
think that anymore, but yeah, that's how I got there.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, man. And I'm glad that you said that because there is this like sentiment. Justin and I have talked about this plenty of times on the pod that like this sort of like hard work, I'm not gonna be stopped, I'm gonna do whatever it takes. It oftentimes can be seen as toxic. And I think it can certainly be toxic sometimes, but toxicity, I think is in that, at least in this respect, is a little bit like pain. And we've talked to you actually probably know Neuro Melody,
Yeah,
Lindsay,
yeah, that's the homie. Yeah,
the pain researcher, a
yeah,
neuroscientist,
yeah.
and she was telling us, she was explaining to us the science behind how pain is really this subjective thing that each individual feels that in a large part is generated within your brain, right? And so it's like, you can't really tell somebody else what does and doesn't feel like pain.
Mhm.
And when it comes to like a toxic work habit or mindset, you can't really tell other people what that means. Like if you want to spend your free time in the evening reading papers so you can be locked in the next day, like there's nothing wrong with that. To
Right,
me, if I stay up all night working on something or, I skip going to a party or whatever, because I'm like working on a project or writing a book, whatever it is, like I don't see anything wrong with that,
right,
especially if you love what you do
right. I
and
mean, it's
you had
happens
this
all
drop.
the time.
Mhm.
Happens all the time.
Yeah, yeah. And if you have a strong drive and have goals that you want to accomplish, in my mind, sometimes that's what it takes.
Mhm.
Unless you're like this uber gifted genius that just instantly gets things and everything just flows smoothly and you don't have to try that hard. But I find that for me, that's not the case. And I think for most people, that's not the case. And working hard can help you overcome that.
Now, I
Yeah.
got a question for y'all because I feel like, and you said I'm in good company with this mindset. We all subscribe to the same hard work ethic, but there's a uniqueness about us that a lot of people might not notice that we're all black men. I don't know if y'all notice, but um, do you
It
think
looks like we look like a couple, like a trio of light skinned men on
that
top of
light skinned black
that.
men, uh, do you think that that plays a part in this desire, this mindsets we have, and this motivation to drive us for something more successful in life? You know?
Hmm.
Hmm.
What do you think?
I think that the fact that we've all gotten to be here as colleagues, being able to talk on a platform like this in this space is a byproduct of the mindset that we've had to have the tenacity to get through and get to the other side for sure.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know if I would directly correlate my blackness with this mindset though.
Hmm.
I don't think that a lot of the black men that I grew up around may
Don't
not
have that.
have this mindset, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah.
Mm.
Do you
Yeah,
think
that's a
other
good.
people would have this mindset if they were exposed to the same things you were?
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. That's interesting that question, and that's a good point. Yeah, like the fact this podcast, right? Me and Justin already put like thousands of hours of work into getting everything lined up, and
Mhm.
in a very short amount of time, Justin got this entire set
Dope
uh
studio.
put.
It's
Yeah,
dope.
Appreciate it, man. Appreciate it.
in like less than a month, everything you can see what's back here, but what you can't see is all the cameras, monitors, the switchboards. There's computers all over the place, which is just behind, obviously behind the camera. And yeah, we wouldn't have this podcast if we didn't have that mentality. I wouldn't have known Justin because I wouldn't have been in SciComm, studying
Mm,
astrophysics. Justin wouldn't have been a science communicator. We wouldn't have met you because you wouldn't have been in grad school. So definitely all I think resonate with that mentality. Do I think that like my blackness plays a role into it in it? I think maybe, right? Um Growing up, figuring out what a man is, I do think that I mean, I guess I didn't grow up thinking of myself as a white man, so it's sort of hard
Yeah.
to
oh,
separate
yeah,
the two.
Yeah.
I grew up like in a culture and I played sports a lot. So, I was always in a football locker room where that dog mentality is like all anybody respects,
Mhm.
right? And so, and I had maybe like half my teammates were white, half of them were black, but yeah, I feel like that's a really good question. I don't know if it's intimately tied to blackness per se, but I do think that it is tied to just like having the experience as a black man for me.
Yeah.
That's a really good
Yeah.
question
I,
though.
No,
I,
that's powerful, Nick.
I say it because I attribute a lot of it to being a black man, but part of it is because my motivation and goals in life is tied to being a black man. So
Mhm.
program I went through in college was a big influence for me as well. But my desire is to help other black men realize STEM as a career is something that's worth pursuing and that we need more representation. But the only
Yeah.
way I can really build off that is showing myself as an example role model. Now, I'm not going to be perfect, but if I could say, oh, I could do it, and I don't think I'm that much better than anyone else, I know y'all could do it too. And I
Mhm.
feel like that stems from the idea that I need to give to my community. I need to show that,
Yeah.
and that all is because I am a black man. I probably wouldn't
Mhm.
have that goal if I didn't have that identity.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's powerful, man. And I just wanted to recount two other things that you mentioned that really resonated with me that I think some of the audience would benefit from knowing about. So you
Hmm.
talked about experiencing an REU, like a research experience for undergraduates that kind of like set you on the path. And these are if you're in undergrad right now, or maybe even younger in high school, or maybe looking into pursuing a science field, these are paid opportunities. A
Hmm.
lot of times they pay, pretty well. At least, at the time when I was in college,
Mhm.
it was good pay.
Yeah.
Thousands of dollars to do research and gain experience in your field and learn about how science works. Like that's a really, really important key
Mhm.
that I think also set me on the path when I was in undergraduate marine environmental science. But the other thing you said, man, it was really powerful telling a story about, how your father passed away from an asthma attack. Like I grew up with asthma in Chicago, man. And,
Mhm.
it wasn't until right in high school, I watched a documentary about this building movement around environmental justice, right?
Mhm.
This idea that in certain communities that have less access to political decision making power, there are power plants and other facilities that kick out carcinogens and other kinds of irritants
Mhm.
that cause these kinds of immune responses, which is what asthma actually is. I
Mhm.
think a lot of people don't understand that it's the constriction of these air pathways in your lungs literally in response to an allergen.
Mhm.
And so, when I like one of the reasons I actually got into environmental science was because I realized a lot of people in my family also grew up with this. And it wasn't because we necessarily were genetically like
Right.
inclined to have asthma, but it's because we grew up in this area
Mhm.
that made us predisposed. And I was like, dang, somebody's got to do something about that. And
It's
so
crazy.
yeah.
Backtracking a little bit, so that is we were just talking about Dr. Sebi earlier and the mucus and all that. Some of these effects might be mucus buildup in your lungs that will cause a lot of these issues as well. And someone could say, well, maybe it's the mucus that's the issue we were talking about earlier. But as you just said, the environmental factor kept
Mhm.
you in a state where the stimulus was always present. Therefore, your body's always trying to remove it, aka mucus,
Mhm.
trying to get it out. And if your environment, like you're saying, isn't set in a way in which you can actually escape that, you'll start to see those negative effects like asthma or whatever else. So I'm happy you brought that up because it does kind of full circle bring it all together.
Yeah. Yeah, dang man, Nick, this has been absolutely riveting, man.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
we could I think we could talk for a couple more hours, man. If I wasn't running out of space on my memory cards over here,
Yeah.
but
Before you close it up, after hearing both of y'all say those things, it also resonates with me greatly to try and this is part of the reason I started making content was for the same reason. There are not many black men that we see in this space. Definitely not that are science communicators and definitely not that are scientists that do that,
Mhm.
which is very important to me as well, right? Because it's like I also have the athlete angle where it's a lot of young black men that don't believe that they can do these things because we don't see a lot of people doing these things. And as
Mhm.
an athlete, same thing. You're taught that you can be good at sports, you could be this, maybe you could go to the league, play ball, but that's not realistic for most people. And if you apply yourself in that same way that you do, this dog work ethic that we talk about, you could do anything. You could build any skill. It could be scientific. You could be an architect. It doesn't really matter. It kind of works across the board. So in that respect, I do think that um, the the high drive that I have is tied to my relationship with blackness in that way, wanting
Mhm.
to also be like a visual representative and help people out and pull people up and get them to believe in themselves, etc. So yeah, man, this was an excellent conversation, the dope
Yeah,
conversation.
And it's crazy you
fantastic,
say
man.
that because I too, I mean, I wanted to be a basketball player growing up, and like the dog mentality was something my dad instilled in me because he played college football. He knew what it took to get to the next level, and he was
Hmm.
guiding me. And he was the one like he would get mad at me because I wouldn't want to go to the gym, 5 a.m. on a Saturday morning. But he's like, that's if you want to be great, this is what you got to do. And it wasn't until I got much older that that started to resonate with me, especially after like me as a man implementing the things he's taught me as I grew up. Like, oh, he
Yeah.
had the sauce the whole time. I just didn't listen. But this is what it
Hmm.
takes to be great is you that
Yeah,
dog eat dog mentality. You gotta put in the work. And it's okay if you don't want to do
100%.
that. But I took that from a sports angle. It didn't work out for me in the sports, but I applied it in education. I've applied it in content creation. I'd say I'm still growing, but it's worked out fairly well for me because they taught me the keys when I was young.
100%, man. So as we're starting to close out here, Nick, another question for you. What's one question you wished you would have asked yourself sooner?
Yeah, how soon we talking? Definitely
Open to interpretation.
different ages and time periods in my life would have had different questions, I think. I think depending on where I'm at, it's a couple of questions I'll always ask myself is it worth it? Is what you're doing worth it? Can you put enough value into it to believe that the payoff is worth it? And I think if a lot of people sit down and just take that question in, they'll start having way more interpretations on if what they're doing is a waste of time in their life or the goal of their
Hmm.
life. Because I think a lot of people struggle there. And
Mm,
I think another thing I'll ask myself uh, is how hard are you willing to work? Because it isn't going to be
mm,
easy, especially if you define the worth. So if you ask yourself, is it worth it? Then you ask yourself, how hard am I willing to work for it? And those two answers
Hmm.
align, that's your goal in life. And if they don't
Yeah.
align, cut it off as soon as possible. Don't even waste your time, yo. And
Yeah.
that applies to everything. I know, like, obviously, we're being very professional, but, um, if that's friends, if that's shorties you talking to in your life, if that's, homework assignments or classes you're taking, or if that's a night run where homie said, come with me, I got a little heist I want to do. Is it worth it? And how hard are you willing to work for it? And if they don't align, say no. And the last thing, this isn't even a question yourself. I would tell myself it's okay to say no more than you realize. But
Yeah.
it's
mm.
okay to say no.
Yeah.
Powerful words, brother. Where can people find you if they want to learn more about you?
Everybody, I appreciate you guys so much. Thanks for having me on and talking to everybody. You can find me, Nick the Immunologist, on all platforms, mostly on Instagram and TikTok, but I do have YouTube and Facebook also. And on those, it's either Nick.immunologist, but the name will be Nick the Immunologist. You can find me anywhere.
All right.
Awesome, brother.
Cool, man.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for tuning in, everybody. And as always, stay curious.
Peace.
Peace out.